Hello, in this video we'll take a look at minimal APIs in .NET 10 in this particular case, but we'll take a look at minimal APIs in general. They were available in the previous versions as well, but in .NET 10 they added a few more features which makes them now a lot more usable and perhaps a lot more convenient. However, there are also some downsides, and it is generally the sort of code management kind of a thing. Do you want to keep code cleaner in this way, or you still want to use controllers? Essentially, if you don't know what a minimal API is, it basically allows us to kind of create these routes to different actions as such by not using controllers, but simply mapping them in the program.cs. So it's kind of just one simple place. You avoid adding more files. However, at the same time, you kind of create a sort of a problem where you have probably lots of things going on in program.cs, although there are some ways to separate that, and we'll kind of explore that more towards the end of the video. But this example basically is a sort of product handler. We have ability to create a product, essentially upload new product, and then also we have the ability to display them, to fetch them via the API endpoints. We also have some validation, which is a new feature in .NET 10. You can do a sort of very direct validation. We'll explore that, how that works. And this particular example we just used was in-memory database, so there's no real database, but essentially it's kind of like any kind of entity framework arrangement. So a very straightforward example. We have Swagger set up, so we can do the API calls, and we will take a look at those examples. But first of all, let's get started with a basic setup, what you need to have the minimal API enabled at all, and then how you can actually map those routes, groups, and different things. Now, as you can see, the project, the whole essentially solution and the project is just program.cs. And to use minimal APIs, you don't need to register any of these additional services. But in this case, we want to use the Swagger, so we don't have to turn on Postman, and we just have that sort of documentation automatically documented, and we can actually try this out a bit quicker. So for that, we do need to have add endpoints API Explorer, and then add OpenAPI. So this is just for the Swagger stuff. And then DB context, obviously, for the database. So we have our sort of fake mock database for the products. One thing that we do need to add to use the latest feature in .NET 10 for the validation is add validation. So you do need to add this. In general, for minimal APIs, you do not need to do anything. Now let's get a bit deeper into the actual minimal APIs, and let's start with something perhaps quite simple here. So first of all, the most basic arrangement here is map. You have some kind of a group, and then you map them. In this case, we first map a group, so we kind of do, perhaps if you would do a controller, you would have a controller products, and then you have your action methods, say get product, or however you choose to name it. Perhaps you choose to do it just with get, or you do something like that. But first of all, you can imagine map group as a controller. So you have your controller name, and if you name controller routes, controller action, that will go like that. Or maybe you map to each action with HTTP methods of get, post, and all those arrangements. But essentially this would act, map group would act as a controller part, if you want to look at it that way. And then we have specific tags, so we will kind of need to match them or not match them, depending on the case. So everywhere we'll use this group, and from this group we then map to specific actions that we might have. But in this case we could just say specific methods. That's a whole perhaps controller and action concept should go away now in a way, depending on how you would like to describe these things. But again, we map to action, we map to method. This method is in program.cs as well, and that's kind of where the whole thing comes in. If you want to use a service, you'll need to add a bit more additional code. You can still do it, you can do a service in a separate file, which obviously for anything at least remotely useful and usable in the real world, you would probably need to go that route. And again, later in the video, we will take a look at that option and how to sort of do it, how to put one of these methods into a separate class. But just to kind of showcase how everything can now be done in one file, I've left it like this for now. But in this case, it would map as get. So the route would be API products. That's our group. And then if the HTTP method is get for this group, then it would map to this action. You should see we don't add anything additional, and we could add, and this would be the same as adding route in your action, or above rather your action in a controller. So the same exact concept essentially, you just don't have a controller file. And then we use the get all products method. The good thing about this arrangement, when you have it directly in program.cs, you don't need to declare any additional sort of parameters or pass for parameters through some complicated lambda expression or anything like that. It just kind of goes through directly into that method. It is very similar in terms of syntax to Blazor, how you have say on-click method in Blazor. If you ever use Blazor, you would know we don't need to pass parameters with arguments and to parameters and all that sort of stuff. You can just do it like that, and it's going to be automatically handled. And the same thing will go for the validation. We will look at that a bit later. But we do need to still have a few perhaps more additional things. So this all is just, of course, description. That's not really needed. Summary as well. And name is kind of the same thing. So all of these things is just for the OpenAPI specifications and for essentially your Swagger documentation. So without these, you can do it like that if you don't want that whole arrangement with the documentation. Now, obviously, at some point you will want that, and whether you want to use Swagger in code or not, that's again completely different decision. But that option is available, or you can go without it. The next thing is produces, so that's essentially what it returns. So like what the method returns, this will be your return. There are a few options here. So if you do get a list, for example, or something else, if you have certain errors such as authentication, authorization, you can produce that specific error, or rather allow it to produce. And a very similar thing we used to have in actions. You have attributes for this sort of an arrangement, so kind of like that. But essentially, as long as you have just a simple return, you can do it like that. So this is just the most basic example, and essentially all you need is map get and then produces something, and you'll have your route perfectly set up. Of course, in this case, we add a bit more complexity with all these Swagger elements, the OpenAPI documentation arrangement. Now, if we take a look at the Swagger when the project is launched, we'll get to the post a bit later, but since we use in-memory database, we don't retain anything, so let's just create a little something and try to pull it out. So in this case, we create just one one single product. And then let's take a look at this route. We have the API products, and I'll also show you how you can change it and it will work perfectly fine. So let's execute now, and as you can see, response body, it returns all the list and also all the sort of documentation, what we had in the whole arrangement is ready and available. However, what we can also do, we can stop it. And if I remove everything, so also notice I can also remove producers. We use that for specific cases, so to return specific error code or OK code, depending on what we have. If that's a result, that's what we return. However, if you want just a simple, the most straightforward arrangement, you can actually just leave it like this. Just producers, rather products, map get. It will still be the same routing mechanism. It will still be, all of it will be basically the same. But now, if we go back into Swagger, we can try it out once again. Now it's with the code change, and I've added a new product. So we can execute this one. And as you can see, it returns perfectly fine. It still has the new product inserted. So again, it can be minimal, it can be less minimal, or it can be just extremely tiny, extremely straightforward, essentially, with only map get. But it can also get a bit more complex, so with all kinds of validation and different kinds of routes. So let's take a look at the next route, which will be with a specific ID. So in this case, we get a specific product. And again, the ID parameter, we use this sort of a parameter arrangement, not a query string. Well, in a way it would be, but we don't use a sort of query parameters, and that way we can use it like that. In this case, it will just pass the ID into this product method, so we can take a look at the actual method. As you can see, it takes product DB, and then it takes integer ID. The previous one, we haven't looked at it. Basically, it takes product DB, and it takes page and size. So that's essentially just determined at the level here. So kind of in a way, a bit confusing arrangement, perhaps. Essentially, it either comes from the body or it comes from parameters. And again, it's quite similar to the routes. But let's take a deeper look at it. I think it will be a bit more clear. In this case, if you would have a normal controller and a normal action, this would be possibly it would have also a little declaration from parameter, right? And then this product DB, it would be a service, so it would be from services. Again, it's all very, very similar to what you have in actions, in methods and controllers. Essentially, what this minimal API does, it replaces that need for a separate controller file. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's sort of a more architectural decision. In some cases, you might find it useful, and in general, it is a matter of preference. There are some benefits here, there are some benefits there. Also, it depends whether you do anything in the actual controller, how you handle all those things. So it really depends on your arrangement. But the actual passing of the data to this method from the API route, it's very, very similar to what you have in the controller. Now, in this case, what we have is some validation, because in order to create a product, we will need some validation, maybe the size of a product, maybe something else. So now in this case, the product will come from body. And if we just look at the parameters, we'll look at the validation as well, but just a quick look at the parameters compared to the other one. You can see right here we have create product request. So this simply comes from the body, and this comes from the services, from register services. And this would be, again, the same exact thing as you have from parameter in the other one, and you can mix and match them. As you can see, it will usually find its way to get to your method. Although you kind of need to have somewhat logical and decent separation, and also if you are going to use this sort of an arrangement, it needs to be sort of by the book. You need to make sure that you use parameters in proper places, and you use body data from proper places. So there is perhaps a bit less movement in that sort of customization. But let's take a look at deeper look at the product, how we actually post, and how we actually handle the validation. The validation itself, it's handled just like any other validation in C# in general, whether it be Blazor or some other arrangement. Basically, we just have the validation attributes, and yes, you can customize them. You can have your custom attributes and all those arrangements. This is very similar to Blazor if you ever use that. The validation will work in a similar way. You have that friendly message, user-friendly message. You can set that. You can set ranges. You can set required. Essentially, the attributes, you can find a list of them. They all will be the same as some of the other things. And the same goes in this example for create product request and update product request, which just have some different things. The sort of interesting part, and perhaps a bit different part compared to something like Blazor and the forms validation like that, is the fact that we get a very sort of friendly message returned with the API response. It's not just user-friendly, but it's actually, it can be used for your sort of client logging purposes, and just handling errors in different ways. So you can set up your custom validation arrangements, and you can certainly kind of handle different sort of bad outcomes or unwanted outcomes in that sort of a way. And we'll take a look in a moment at what it looks like. But again, essentially, we just have this, and we don't need to add any sort of additional attribute, as you can see. As long as we have the validation attributes inside on the properties for this object, it will be perfectly fine. And again, in this case, this will be passed through the body. So if you do HTTP post in your client, perhaps a Blazor application, perhaps a .NET MAUI application, or whatever it might be, it will be in the body. It will be passed through here, and then the product will be from the services. So again, essentially from body, if you had, this won't really work, but imagine if like this, you have from body, and then the other one would be from services, and you can actually set them like that. So again, this method just really becomes like your action method in a normal controller. Basically, it can kind of have all those bits and pieces. We just don't use attributes, so we wouldn't use like HTTP GET or put, let's say, like this. Instead, we use those attributes as such, not attributes, but essentially the same idea. We use them here. So we map to post, and you could also extend this route, say do something additional like this. And then we use that action method, essentially create a product. So all of this stuff, it's very kind of similar to having all those attributes above your action in a controller. The only difference is that we have it in program.cs and set it up like that. And you could sort of separate it in different methods, or rather different classes and different files. But again, you need to always think, do you really need this minimal API, or perhaps splitting things up in controller files is actually better. Now, But it is not, again, it is fully a matter of preference, and there are some points to kind of discuss and work out. One of the things always is, do we actually use those controller action methods for many things? Maybe we just take the data and pass it to the server. So maybe then we don't actually need it that much. But again, as you can see, this isn't exactly less code. It is still quite a bit of code, and also it goes to program.cs, so you'll probably need to still have some kind of a different arrangement, some kind of a separate class to kind of wrap this whole thing up. It doesn't necessarily minimize the code. However, there are cases sometimes where you only need something like map get, perhaps one parameter, or perhaps you need map post, and you need some validation to it as well, but you just need map post and nothing more. So you can add your validation, you can add your validation attributes on those properties and do just map post. It will return something, or it will return OK to one created right here. If we return what was created, essentially it will produce a status till one created. So really depends on your needs, and if you need that minimal arrangement, that's what minimal APIs are for. But in general, it can become quite confusing. So this isn't a replacement for controllers. This is just another way to handle all those incoming requests. But now let's take a look at what the validation actually looks like and kind of how to read it and use it. So if we do a little post here, let's try it out. By default it's string, but let's do test1 like that. It doesn't really matter. Now it will work perfectly fine. Let's execute. And it was created. So you see we get our return response body, what was in the request body. That means it produces code 201. However, the validation is that I believe we need 3 characters for the name. So let's try and execute with 1 character for the name. Name is T, 1 character. Let's see what happens now. And now we get error status 400. But what's better is, of course, we do have this title, which we don't really need. We have a type, which sort of, in a way, we don't necessarily need. So in some cases, you can use it to kind of read the error better and handle it automatically if you have your client, perhaps some library in your client, whatever it may be. It may be a React app, it may be a .NET MAUI, it may be Flutter, it may be something else. But the good thing about it is we also get this list of errors, and you can essentially map it to your inputs on your client application. So if you have your name input and it has a validation error, you can map it very easily with this. And of course, with Blazor, it becomes a lot more easier, a lot more convenient. It's all kind of integrated perfectly. So you will get all those errors like this. And for example, I do believe we are not allowed to add negative stock. Yes, indeed we're not. And so now we have, again, all the errors, all the validation errors for all the items. So it's not just like you try the name isn't good, and then you try it again and the stock isn't valid. So you get the full validation experience with all those validation attributes, very convenient and very straightforward. Getting back to the code, we still kind of have a problem that all of the methods in this case are in the same essentially file, and this file would become massive. Probably in a larger project it would become thousands upon thousands of lines of code, which isn't a very good thing. So what we can do, we can actually move this to a separate file, a separate class, and register it as a service. So we can do that just to kind of see how it all happens. So we don't need a folder. We can just do a little class like this. let's call it a products service, like that. And then we will move this method. I won't do all of them. And also you can download this whole example from Patreon and get it from there. And you can also find some good free courses with certain subscriptions and also other code samples for other videos on this channel. I'm just going to copy it. I don't want to remove it, so the example will contain all of these arrangements. But let's say basically now we have this service, and of course for this service to actually work, we will need, let's see, like that, to inject this product DB, because this is coming from the service. The only problem is now the service will kind of need to be injected as well. So one way you can kind of solve this, at least, well, to some extent, you can simply just do this. Let's get the code, get all products. And what you can do is, not the most perhaps appropriate solution, but in some cases it may work. Let's see, like that, like that, like that. And where is it? We are missing the public. Now it's all out in public, and now we can do it like this. So essentially what we kind of do here is we just put that method in a separate file. And of course you could construct it in somewhere here and not have this in every line. So that's kind of one way to do it, and we can launch the code just to kind of see that it works. So now with the code change, we can try out the calling. I already created a product. Let's try it out. And as you can see, we do return string 01. And if we say go ahead and create another product like this, perhaps a couple more I created. So now it works perfectly fine. This sort of an arrangement, again, we kind of get rid of the need to inject the whole service, because now we'll take a look at how we would do if it was actually injected service. Now, in this case, we just kind of put those methods in a different class, and maybe it's by the book, maybe it's not by the book arrangement, but it's one way to kind of handle that messiness, because you will have to handle, realistically, you will have to handle it like that, unless you, again, you only use the minimal API for minimal API purposes. You maybe have 2 or 3 routes and that's it, and you don't care about it. Or maybe you have a Blazor application that needs to expose perhaps 1 or 2 routes. That's one very, very useful scenario for this whole range. Back in the code, I've made some additional changes to the product service, so to actually make it a real service as such. Now in this case, we need to inject the product DB like that. It's all in there, and we use product DB instead of passing product DB essentially from the parameters from services. But in this case now it sort of becomes not really an action method, it's your method in your service. And that kind of creates additional complexity in how it can be handled in the actual minimal API, which as you can now see, it's not so minimal. It needs a few additional things. Of course, we register the service, and then that gets passed down to that. All good, all great. If you're using a service in a normal way, you would use that service throughout your application. But now, in this case, instead of just having simple name of the method, essentially, we also need to have this whole massive lambda expression. So these default values go in here, and then the whole service now becomes this thing. So we need to pass that, and then we essentially execute only the method from the service, which kind of probably ruins in a way the point of minimal API, because now you need to have this additional setup with the parameters. So you take all those parameters from there, and then you pass it to this new method, which essentially this whole arrangement now becomes your action method, and then you just use a service as you would any service. This is probably valid to some extent, but then again, the question is, do you really want to use minimal APIs if your minimal API isn't really so minimal anymore? And of course, you can wrap all these other things in many other ways in different files and do all those kinds of arrangements. But again, it is sort of a preferential thing, whatever you want, whatever you do. The best probably use case for minimal APIs is to have a minimal if you only need a couple of routes, and maybe even if you need a couple of routes, you don't want to create a separate structure rather, for controllers. You only need to expose 2 routes for your Blazor application, Blazor server application. Maybe this is the way to go. It will probably expand your program.cs a bit, but at the same time, you're not adding sort of more files to your whole project, which might be a good thing in some cases. Now, you can find the whole source code on Patreon. You can find some free courses for certain tiers of subscription. And with that said, we will conclude this video.